It is no secret that the media in their smear campaigns use techniques that were employed in the past by Hitler and Goebbels during the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich. One of these techniques, and one of the most cruel and most insidious, is the method the Nazis used, called the method of marking with yellow stars. This method is a tool of social manipulation. It is a significant step towards dehumanization, ultimately leading to the complete moral breakdown of the entire society. However, the Nazis were not the originators of this method. They borrowed it from anti-cultists, and the anti-cultists thoroughly trained them, ensured their impunity, and taught them how to exert immense pressure on innocent and blameless people. Dear friends, we sincerely thank you for joining us at this round table. Today's topic will be Nazi yellow stars in the digital era. We were inspired by the Impact documentary, which you can find online, as well as Dr. Egon Chalakian's video address titled The Crossroads. Much of the information we will discuss today can be found on actfiles.org in the article titled Method of Marking with Yellow Stars. The method of marking with yellow stars is used to create a hostile attitude across society towards a selected particular group of people, leading to lynching and even the physical eradication of these people. It has several stages, so I will just briefly outline the introduction, and then we will continue our discussion. The first stage involves fostering intolerance towards this group of people by means of negative images, including in the media, essentially labeling. The second stage is dehumanization, leading to social isolation, and the cruelest third stage is persecution, imprisonment, and genocide. I believe we can now begin and explore this method further.
Right. As stated in the article, the first phase begins attaching negative labels to a specific group of people by using easy-to-remember derogatory and emotionally charged words or expressions. These labels create an informational stereotype filled with strong emotions, such as fear or hatred. This labeling bypasses people's critical thinking. They completely overlook all positive qualities of the given target and do not even attempt to seek evidence or facts. Manipulators often select catchy and derogatory dysphemisms. They frequently use terms that, before the manipulator adopted them, were commonly used in everyday conversation, but through constant repetition, these terms take on negative connotations and become ingrained in the public's consciousness. And, as we have already mentioned, the most tragic case was Nazi Germany, where it all started with the media spreading information that Jews were lesser beings, that they were a danger to society. And in September 1941, Nazi Germany ordered that every Jew wear the yellow star on their clothing. This yellow star labeled Jews as, and I quote the article, socially dead beings. It served as a means of easy identification, which allowed for faster deportations to concentration camps. The yellow star was a symbol of public humiliation, making Jews targets of social condemnation and social persecution. And of course, it became a symbol of bloodshed. This methodology of the yellow star is far more dangerous and extreme than standard labeling because it signifies cruelty, it signifies genocide, and it becomes the tool through which society begins to accept genocide as a necessary means of cleansing. It is, therefore, a methodically driven process that begins with labeling and ends with mass murder.
Exactly as you said, when we were preparing, I realized that labeling is common, but this method, unfortunately, operates at the highest level. It really hit me during the preparation that the cruelty of this method lies in the fact that it inevitably leads to genocide. And I think we can move forward now and discuss specific cases, because this can help many people recognize it, not only historically, studying the past, but also today. This method is still used today, though it's hidden. Once we learn to recognize it, it can help many people to save their lives.
Yes, so now we're talking about the first stage, which is the stage of implementation. This stage includes labeling, intolerance, and the creation of a negative image. How does this work exactly? Let's break it down. A particular group of people or an organization is selected. It could be religious, it could be secular, that doesn't matter. Then, a very derogatory label, carrying negative meaning, is attached to this group. Well, and this is where it all begins. An image of the enemy begins to be artificially created in society. This means that a negative image of these people is being deliberately formed. Various lies, disinformation, and falsehoods start spreading, portraying these people as dangerous, as a threat to society and even to the citizens of that state. Various prejudices and negative stereotypes are propagated. And as a result, this leads to intolerance and hatred toward these people. Think about how terrible it is that when someone is constantly fed such information, when they encounter someone who is the victim of such disinformation campaigns, they don't see him as a person. They see the label, the enemy, the threat. It invokes fear, hatred, and they couldn't care less who that person is, whether they have children, a family, or what their job is. None of that matters anymore. Let's now look at some concrete examples from history. Take Nazi Germany. We all know that Jews were labeled there. It started being spread that Jews were different, dangerous, and enemies of the state. Various publications, films, and cartoons depicted them as greedy, as enemies, as financial swindlers, and as those spreading diseases. There was also a particular German newspaper, Der Stürmer, which regularly published such content about the Jews, portraying them as treacherous, untrustworthy, and even claiming they ate German children. Now let's come back to the present. Take the example of Russia. The official Orthodox website of the Missionary Department of the Novosibirsk Diocese in Russia issued a statement that Jehovah's Witnesses pose a threat to society. It's like a carbon copy. Well, I'll quote from what's on their website. The international religious organization Jehovah's Witnesses is a totalitarian anti-Christian sect whose teachings and practices are capable of causing harm to the adherent, their mental and physical health, and their family. And all of this starts with a single label.
As stated in the article on Act Files, dehumanization is a process in which a person or group is portrayed not as human beings, but as something foreign and inferior. This is done through comparisons to animals, parasites, or subhumans who must be socially isolated and eliminated. By creating this image, the media prepares society to believe that violence against this group is justified and even necessary. Simultaneously, discrimination is enforced at the political and legal levels. The targeted group is stripped of civil rights and barred from certain professions and services. Let's take a historical example. In Nazi propaganda, Jews were often presented as rats or insects, which contributed to their dehumanization in the eyes of the public. Jews were forbidden to work as doctors, to practice law. Educational and scientific institutions were closed to them. But we can also look at the present. For instance, Alexander Dworkin introduced the terms totalitarian sect and destructive cult, not only in relation to religious movements, but also to non-religious groups, organizations, and regimes, including various business entities and even construction firms, cafes, and hotels. As early as 1952, terms like totalitarian sect and destructive cult appeared in the U.S. Dworkin calls these organizations sects and cults, even compares them to cancerous tumors in society. Among these so-called cancerous tumors are Jehovah's Witnesses and followers of Vissarion. He even claims that when someone becomes a Jehovah's Witness, they are unlikely to become a teacher or a doctor.
It's really hard to hear this. I remembered we were just talking about Germany, America, Russia, but we can also talk about things right here in Slovakia. We can give an example from Slovakia. What happened to us, the Alatra participants this spring? Certain people organized a significant conference in Bratislava, which was dedicated to artificial intelligence. And we found an announcement that they were accepting interesting speakers. We have a huge number of specialists among us, experts in various fields. And we offered one participant who is a scientist, an expert in psychiatry and psychology, and the president of a European association. Of course, the organizers liked her. We even met several times on Zoom. We sent the presentation on time. They had everything in advance. They approved it, and the conference went ahead. Everything was fine. Even a radio station came for an interview. It was very interesting that the conference participants themselves came up to her and asked questions. Everything went great. But the next day, we got an email, and I'll take the liberty of reading a part of it. Quote, "One of our media partners who was at the conference noticed the logo you had in the video. The logo belongs to Alatra, a religious movement that we have absolutely no interest in associating our conferences with in any way. And at this point, there was a link to a website that was very defamatory of us. It called us a destructive cult, and the email went on to say, likewise, our program director with whom you did the interview does not wish in any way to be promoted on your websites. Nor does he wish the interview with him to be published or broadcast anywhere. We hereby place an absolute ban on any association of Alatra activities with our event." And for me, the most brutal part was the ending, where it says, "We deeply regret that there has been such misleading communication on your part, or failure to inform us as organizers that the speaker has any connection to the mentioned movement. We sincerely hope that you will fully accept our decision." Of course, we responded to this, and another reply came. "Despite what you have written, I think that the speaker you have offered us, and who was part of the conference, does not really belong here at such a highly technical conference. And you really should have known that, because we feel that you misled us with the information about her. What have we come to? That from a highly qualified specialist and scientist, thanks to anti-cult defamation, she got labeled? I just really want to draw your attention, viewers, to what was written there. That we were required to report in advance that a top-level expert was actually a member of Alatra, and that she doesn't belong at a high-level expert conference like this, not because she's not competent enough, but because she has the Alatra label. To me, this is a specific case of marking a person with a yellow star. And if we consider that they used the word Alatra in that email, then basically, for this conference, any world-class scientist from the ranks of Alatra is simply unacceptable and has been labeled, marked with a yellow star. Where is all of this heading?
Where is all of this leading? It's leading to persecution and genocide. Just like in Nazi Germany, today in many countries, including Russia, we see that in this third stage that we are talking about, state-sponsored persecution, repression, arrests, deportations, and even organ harvesting and mass killings are escalating. As we have already mentioned, it all started in Nazi Germany with the publication of articles against the Jews. Based on these articles, people started hating the Jews. They even began to attack them. They started destroying their property, humiliating them, and this actually laid the groundwork for the pogroms and the Holocaust. And as you also mentioned, Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia didn't escape the state repression either. In 2017, there was a massive wave of arrests based on this information, where they were likened to terrorist organizations like ISIS. And of course, as you mentioned, they are banned from political involvement. They are actually humiliated in society, and even in besides being compared to ISIS, they are also likened to the Japanese doomsday cult that carried out a terrorist attack on the Tokyo subway in 1995. Even though they had nothing to do with it, because they are a peaceful organization.
Innocent people.
Innocent people.
Another example of dehumanization and genocide are the events in Rwanda in 1994. Hatred was spread mainly by the RTLM radio station, which broadcast anti-Tutsi propaganda. The radio called on people to exterminate the cockroaches. They also broadcast the names of people who were to be killed. I was about 30 years old at the time, and I remember what was happening, what was going on at the time. You know, someone may say that Nazism can't happen again now. But what happened then, many believe, surpassed even Nazism. In the capital city of Kigali, roadblocks were put up on the roads where people were checked. Anyone going through the checkpoints had to show their ID, which indicated whether they were Hutu or Tutsi. Tutsis were killed immediately. The machete became the tool of killing. The genocide became so absurd that after some time, the police members were physically exhausted from killing. So they would just cut off certain parts of the victim's body or cut the tendons and leave them to suffer for a few days, and then they came to finish the job. Those with money could buy a quick death, a death by being shot either for themselves or their family. I will now read how one of the convicts described the atmosphere. They were killing ordinary men and women. No one was to be spared. We were loaded into cars and taken to the mountains to kill. Then there was singing and dancing. When you kill the first person, you feel something. In my case, it was my neighbor. After that, you don't feel anything. The bodies of the genocide victims were thrown into the Kagera River, which flows into Lake Victoria. Some unofficial sources say that during the first few weeks, about 40,000 bodies were pulled from the lake. In particular, Ugandans, the usual fish consumers, at that time refused to buy the fish caught from this lake. The number of genocide victims in less than 100 days was enormous, around 1 million. Different sources give different figures. You know, when I talk about it, 700,000, 800,000, even if it were just one genocide victim, it would be too many. It is important to understand that behind each number lies a tragic life story. or the whole family that has been marked. It is estimated that about 20% of the country's population was killed. Up to 60% of children became orphans or half-orphans. The rate of the killing was staggering. According to the French historian Gérard Prunier, it was 5 times worse than the Nazi Holocaust. I think many people are familiar with the Nazi period only from the Second World War. It's like when you have the alphabet, but you only see the last letter, the letter Z. But the alphabet also includes the letters A, B, C, D, etc. And these letters A, B, C, D represent what happened before World War II. A lot of people don't know this, and it's here at such discussions, or our roundtables, that we organize to bring the audience closer to what was happening then. We are pointing out that what's happening now is the same patterns of labeling and persecution that lead to genocide and mass tragedies like the Holocaust.
It's really hard to continue, isn't it?
It's hard to listen to this.
You can't even listen to it. Like you said, he basically didn't feel anything anymore after that first murder. This is where absolute humanity is lost.
And the question is, what do our viewers feel when they listen to this? Do they see the real human suffering behind this information? Can they even imagine themselves in the shoes of that other person? Or do they just see them, as we've mentioned, as some number or an animal? Or, I don't know, something.
And we really don't want to judge anyone here because we firmly believe that as we've listened to various testimonies, many were forced. And they were also forced to do horribly insane things under the threat of killing a family member. Overall, it was just horrible.
Or if he didn't want to kill, he was killed.
Or his family member was. Now, let's move on. Although it's very hard to say anything after this, I think. But we have one more example from Germany. There are companies owned by, I'll put it bluntly, by Scientologists. And there was a case in Germany where all the files of companies owned by Scientologists were marked with the letter S, given an S label. And what did that mean in practice? That again, the people hidden in these records, in these lists, these folders, these files, again, no human rights or laws were actually applied to them at all. They just became non-humans. And the people who were handling these files started to treat those people as such. And isn't that the same as how the Nazis treated the Jews? It's some kind of Holocaust all over again. And we know that we have to identify, we simply must identify everyone who's doing this. And we must put all the anti-cultists on the bench of the accused, and we must punish all the anti-cultists and their agents, who are literally brainwashed. There's no other way to call it.
And notice that those victims are always peaceful, decent and innocent people who act within the law, and who are simply victims of these disinformation attacks, and are persecuted based on rumors, lies, and falsehoods spread by anti-cultists. And you know, anti-cultists, they like to talk about how they care about children, how they protect children, yet they are the ones who have the blood of children on their hands. Let's remember the terrible tragedy in Waco, which happened in America in 1993, in which 82 innocent people died, including more than 20 children. So the anti-cultists launched a disinformation campaign there, accusing the Davidians of abusing their children, of mentally and physically torturing them. So how did the anti-cultists take care of those children? They burned them alive. Burned them alive. This is how anti-cultists take care of children. This is how they protect children, by killing them. I would like to come back to one more point here. One of those main characters was a person named Mark Breault. He was actually a former member of the Davidians who left the Branch Davidians because he had some sort of conflict with the main leader, David Koresh. Mark Brault was blind, and after he left, he declared himself a prophet. And he was also behind this disinformation smear campaign, where they accused the Davidians of child abuse and specifically claimed that David Koresh was planning to kill children. And this was the same Mark Brault who, along with his colleague, reported the Davidians to the Texas Child Protective Services, alleging that they were abusing children there. And now, listen carefully. The Child Protection Authority came to the Davidian ranch twice and then declared that everything was fine there, that no one was abusing the children, no one was mentally or physically torturing them, and that the children were being well taken care of. And that is why the authorities did not take any action, because they saw that there were normal, peaceful people living there. And the most terrible thing is that this Mark was a member of the Davidians. He knew that they were peaceful, innocent people. He knew that they were taking good care of those children. But despite that, look what he did. He has the blood of those children on his hands. He also has the blood of those children on his hands. And during the Waco siege, during that raid, the ATF agents made a fatal mistake by relying on information from the American anti-cultist, criminal, and deprogrammer Rick Ross, as well as the Russian developer of psychological technology, Igor Smirnov, who was doing this kind of subliminal psychological influence on the masses. You can learn more about this event in The Impact documentary, where it's analyzed in great detail. And how did this tragedy end? The death of 82 innocent people and 20 children, who were either killed by gas or simply shot. This raises a real question. Who is really behind this terrible tragedy? And if we look at just this one tragedy as an example, how can the fight against so-called cults continue?
Right, at this point, I can't help but mention a parallel that affects us as well. Consider that in Waco, there was Mark Brault, a blind member who aspired to power, and when he didn't succeed, he left and turned against Koresh and started spreading disinformation about him, which led to all the murder of all the Davidians. Within the Alatra International Public Movement, there was one, let's call her mother, who...
An anti-cultist mother, we can say.
Now we can call her an anti-cultist mother, the mother of a blind son, coincidentally, who also, when she was still a member of the movement, promoted the views of her blind son. Later, she left. And recently, this blind son, coincidentally, by chance, stated under a discrediting video, which was deliberately edited. So she said that it should not be taken lightly that the participants of Alatra International Public Movement are planning a mass suicide. What a coincidence.
What a coincidence.
A brutal coincidence.
We kept observing further, so let me add to what caught my attention. On social media, we found that this anti-cultist mother publicly shared posts from the biggest Czech anti-cultist, who was highlighted in the Impact film. Dear viewers, when you watch the film, it's directly mentioned there. And if I may, I'll read a passage from the film. American anti-cultists, Hassan and Troy, actively supported the release of a book by anti-cultist Alex Alvarova from the Czech Republic, a country that is one of the centers of anti-cultism in Europe. In her book, Feeding the Demons, the Conquerors of America, Alvarova essentially continues to promote Hassan's narrative and consciously uses the method of marking with yellow stars. What do we know about this method? If we briefly summarize it now, it's not a method developed by the Nazis. It's a method the Nazis adopted from anti-cultists. The anti-cultists trained them. It's chilling to hear. but they provided them with impunity and taught them cruel methods of coercion to pressure innocent people. We know that this is the most brutal method of labeling. And knowing all this, and the fact that the anti-cultist mother is essentially sharing the most well-known Czech anti-cultist female identified in the Impact film, we can only expect that the training continues. It keeps spreading. Essentially, Nazism is continuing. And many people are asking, who among these anti-cultist ranks started this method? And right in the article on actfiles.org, which we're discussing today, it states that it was, though I don't want to say the Lutheran Church, because not the entire church is bad. I want to emphasize this. We're not attacking churches, but a certain group of anti-cultists that infiltrated the Lutheran Church basically started promoting and spreading this entire method. And what did they accomplish? It's almost terrifying to hear that in the 1930s, due to this method, these Protestant anti-cultists turned ordinary people, ordinary Germans, into Nazis. You mentioned labeling with yellow stars, but few know that as early as 1933, Nazi anti-cultists had already begun arresting Jehovah's Witnesses, Bible students, and when they later sent them to concentration camps, they were marked with purple triangles as badges. And what did this mean again? That even in those terrible concentration camps, the purple badge meant even more cruel treatment, and a huge number of people died there.
I'd like to go back to what we were discussing earlier about Waco. Think about the parallels. Just as in Nazi Germany, no one asked the Jews what they thought, in Waco, no one asked the Davidian leaders what they thought either. When the siege began, all phone and internet connections were even cut off for them so that the public couldn't hear their side. So it is today, dear friends. How many articles have been published slandering Alatra? And how much media space has been given to the people themselves? After all, there are millions of people in Alatra all over the world. But space was given to one specific woman who probably failed to exercise her ambitions and is now slandering the movement. One person was given space in dozens of articles and dozens of interviews. And when public television came to film, as if to give us a chance to speak, they edited 2 hours of footage down to 1 minute and 43 seconds. So that says something, and you don't want to see it. Just as you closed your eyes in the 1930s in Nazi Germany, just as eyes were closed at Waco, you are turning a blind eye now to what's happening around you. But what I also wanted to mention is the history behind all this. Where did it all begin? In 1921, an apologetics center was founded in Germany, which became the prototype for modern anti-cultist organizations. This apologetics center started gathering databases and information about all sorts of organizations that didn't fit the prevailing ideology at the time. They began holding lectures, publishing materials, and writing discrediting articles about these organizations. And this parallels what happened during the Inquisition in the Middle Ages, and what's actually happening even now. In 1933, the leadership of the Apologetics Center was taken over by Protestant pastor Walter Kunneth, who was an open anti-Semite and collaborated with the Gestapo. He provided them with a full list of these organizations, teaching them techniques on how to deal with what we can call undesirable groups, which we've already mentioned today. Due to his actions, they began persecuting, labeling, and marking people with yellow stars. So Nazi Germany became what it was only when it started collaborating with anti-cultists. As we've already mentioned regarding the third step about the Inquisition, this led to Reinhard Heydrich, who was the head of internal security, issuing a directive that established a pattern for suppressing certain religious societies, sects, and cults, including arrests, interventions, and sending people to concentration camps. So it all started with anti-cultists.
They actually taught this to the Nazis.
They taught it to the Nazis, and they implemented it at the state level. And this precisely resembles what's happening today in many countries where people are being arrested and so on.
The same method.
Exactly the same methods.
It's clear that the training is still ongoing.
Thoroughly.
Exactly. And think about it. If it weren't for that apologetic center, Nazi Germany wouldn't have looked the way it does today. Tens of millions of people wouldn't have lost their lives. The NSDAP would have been a standard National Socialist Party. So all this labeling with yellow stars was introduced by anti-cultists.
A very powerful method.
And they're still doing it today. But what's even more interesting, something we found in the article on actfiles.org, which is actually a historical fact, is that this Walter Kunneth was never prosecuted after the war. Quite the opposite. He was honored. In 1946, he became an honorary professor of theology.
Isn't it right to ask how that's possible?
And there's a parallel with today's Dvorkin, who...
How is that possible?
How is that possible?
Let's move on to the facts in an article on Act Files. A disciple of Friedrich Wilhelm Haack, Alexander Dvorkin founded the Center for Religious Studies in Russia in 1993 in the name of Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. The activities of this center closely follow the ideas and methods of the Apologetics Center, which continues the legacy of Nazism. The Irenaeus of Lyon Center later became the nucleus of the Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects, which we know by the acronym RACIRS. RACIRS currently compiles lists of undesirable organizations, and it is a list not only of religious groups, but also of social and also commercial entities. These organizations are labeled cults, totalitarian sects, and destructive cults, which is strongly reminiscent of preparations for a planned genocide, just as the Nazis did, with the active assistance of the Apologetics Center in the run-up to World War II. In 1941, the pinnacle of stigmatization was the word Jew. Now it is the term cult, sect. These have become instruments of persecution, just as the word Jew was then. As a result, groups of people who operate legally and do not break the law are subjected to unlawful persecution. What else I think is important to point out is that Nazism is manifesting itself today in an extremely harsh form, but it is not provoking an adequate reaction in the public. That is to say, the public is silent. Just as the word Jew once aroused hatred, so today the words sectarian and cult member do.
So what can we people expect from modern Nazism? Today, this inhumane Lutheran Nazi method of marking with yellow stars is used by anti-cult organizations all over the world. Through it, they create an image of the external enemy from groups of people they themselves have chosen. Consider how twisted it is that they have given themselves the right to determine the fate of humanity. Who is good and who is bad? They sort of go around and just walk up to a group of people and say, label, enemy, label, enemy. However, this violates all human rights and freedoms. And as has already been mentioned, yes, in the past, that stigma, that label was the term Jew and heretic. Nowadays, terms like totalitarian sect, destructive cult, and their variations introduced by Alexander Dvorkin are used. Well, when someone labels people with such terms, it is simply a direct attack on that person's life. As we've already mentioned, it simply violates all fundamental rights, constitutional rights, human values, and norms. And think about how the group of people who have fallen victim to all of this are constantly subjected to such informational terror. They are spreading lies about these people. They accuse them of all the sins in the world, which they didn't commit. And then the tension escalates. The hatred in society towards them also grows. It leads to persecution. Law enforcement agencies get involved, and how does it end? With the physical elimination of these people. This method of marking with yellow stars is simply an aggressive way of removing not only groups of people and organizations, but even entire nations from this world. Take it, when someone today calls you a sect or a cult, it is basically equivalent to the label Jews received back then. This method always leads to dehumanization, as has also been mentioned today. It means that people no longer see you as a human. You are perceived as some kind of beast, some sort of trash that can be treated any way. And it's even justifiable because you are trash, so you can be treated very badly. As stated on the ACT Files website, the method of marking with yellow stars can be defined like this. It is the official approval of violence in society against those groups of people whom anti-cultists deem non-humans. And in essence, it's actually labeling people and showing who must be eliminated.
We can say that the stigma of terms like sect or cult, totalitarian sect, or destructive cult, these labels used by anti-cultists, are not only applied to religious organizations, but also to secular organizations, even entire countries and unions of states. It is absolutely nonsensical and outrageous that anti-cultists, Russian anti-cultists, were calling the whole of Ukraine, an entire country, one massive national sect even before the war in Ukraine. And what I'd call a warning sign is that these same anti-cultists are now supporting the idea that all of Europe, I'll reiterate, all of Europe, is one giant cult. Isn't this proof that Nazism is continuing? When someone is labeled or called a cultist, it's not just an insult, it's the spread of Nazism. That's why all of you who use terms like cultist or sectarian are no different from those who shouted, "Send people to the gas chambers." By what right do you label people you don't even know? All of this is the spread of Nazism, but we can say there's something encouraging. An investigation of a very large scale is currently underway, and every single person who even slightly contributed to these atrocities and inhumane treatment of people will be brought to justice. We will witness the Nuremberg trials of the 21st century. All will be justly punished for spreading Nazi ideas, for humiliating people, and for committing atrocities against innocent people.